to achieve that result. And when it comes to entertainment and consumer electronics, there are perhaps no two better examples than Disney and Nintendo, but more on them in a minute. First, to continue watching this video, please click the I agree button shown here. No need to read all of the tiny text, it's just a binding legal agreement that says that before you consume this piece of content, you agree not to watch any videos on YouTube other than Wendigoon and Wendigang, on occasion Creepcast, that even if my video causes you significant harm, like say, if I read a bunch of your personal information out loud to millions of people, you can't sue me, and that I can freely take your data and sell it to anyone I want. And no, I don't have to tell you I'm doing that. Obviously, aside from a few of you freaks, none of you would hit that button. Also, if you just tap the screen if you're on your phone, it pauses the video, so, don't do that either. What I just described wasn't too far off from EULAs, or end-user license agreements, that pretty much any software and many hardware products make you agree to before you can use them. This is a contract between the company and the eventual user of the product, specifying the terms and conditions of use. EULAs are forms of adhesion contracts, which is a contract provided by one party with considerable bargaining strength, presented to consumers of goods and services who have little to no ability to negotiate the terms of the deal. Think things like mortgages, insurance, leases, airplane tickets, and baggage fees. If you ever tried negotiating the terms of these agreements with, say, American Airlines about changing the language of their contracts before you buy a plane ticket, you were probably met with laughter and the sound of them hanging up the phone, which my concerns were valid. I don't know why they did that. Many of these products and services are almost essential to modern life. iPhones and apps like Google Maps, renting a car or taking an Uber, and even watching TV shows and movies. Holding these necessities hostage until you agree to give up personal rights and privileges isn't something people should have to sacrifice, and yet many of us do, often without realizing it. Which brings us back to Disney and Nintendo. Now, these are just two examples out of many examples of companies trying to enforce predatory agreements and EULAs. I'm not singling them out as the only offenders, but recently, both have been the center of controversy for leveraging their powers in ways that feel borderline abusive. Today I'm going to dive into these types of agreements and break down the troubling trend amongst some of the biggest corporations, their infringements on consumers' rights, the public backlash they faced, and the occasionally deadly consequences of their actions. Yes, you heard me right, deadly. Let's start with Disney. The Walt Disney Company is known for their timeless classic animated films and theme parks that span the globe. From Anaheim to Paris and many others in between, over decades, Disney has carefully crafted their reputation as a wholesome, family-forward brand, a company practically made from magic. Every year, millions of visitors pass through the gates of Disney parks, of which a single-day park pass for a family of 4 costs over $1,000, plus, parking, food, souvenirs, and the hotel stay. On October 3rd, 2023, a woman named Kanokporn Tang Swan, also known as Amy, along with her husband Jeffrey Piccolo and Jeffrey's mother Jackie, dined at the Raglan Road Irish Pub in the downtown Disney Springs area in Orlando, Florida. On the Disney Springs website, Raglan Road proudly promoted itself as a restaurant with several allergen-free options. Amy, a New York area physician, had a very severe dairy and nut allergy, which led the family to choose this specific restaurant. Upon ordering, they checked with the server multiple times to confirm the food would be free of ingredients known to be fatal to Amy. In turn, the server checked with the kitchen, who, quote, unequivocally assured them the food would be allergen-free. When the food arrived at the table, it was not marked with the allergen-free flags that typically adorn meals with dietary restrictions. Again, the family checked, and again, the server insisted the food was safe. So Amy, Jackie, and Jeffrey ate like it was just another meal. Fortunately, this would not be like just another meal. Shortly after the group separated to go shopping in downtown Disney, 45 minutes after the food was consumed, Amy suffered an acute allergic reaction while shopping by herself in Planet Hollywood. Sensing something was wrong, Amy self-administered her EpiPen while a bystander called 911, and she was rushed to a nearby hospital. Her family, who was attempting to contact her, had no idea this was happening to their wife and daughter. They only obtained details of her whereabouts from someone who found her phone. Racing to the medical center, Jeffrey and Jackie were too late. Amy had died from anaphylaxis due to elevated levels of dairy and nuts in her system. As tragic as this already was, it was about to get even worse for the family. That's because on February 22nd, 2024, Jeffrey filed a lawsuit, as you could imagine, against Raglan Road and Walt Disney Parks and Resorts for $50,000 in damages and a trial by jury, which $50,000. If I triple check with you that my wife's food doesn't have the thing she's allergic to in it, and you keep telling me it's okay, and then she dies, your great grandchildren are going to inherit your debt. Well, thankfully, if you've learned anything from these channels, you've learned that corporations are quick to accept responsibility and make amends for any wrongdoing. The suit claimed negligence as Raglan Road and Disney failed to properly train its staff members to follow its own allergy policies and procedures for food preparation and food service. In response, Disney filed a motion to compel arbitration and stay case on May 31st of 2024. In other words, Disney wanted to stop the court case and force Jeffrey into arbitration. This would potentially prevent a trial by jury, which would also spare Disney from a lot of bad press. Now, forcing a plaintiff into arbitration is extremely difficult in most situations, because arbitration is meant to be voluntary. It doesn't usually benefit an alleged victim to bypass a trial and essentially enter into settlement talks with their offender. However, there is one way in which a party can be forced into arbitration, and that's if they've signed an agreement saying they will, which, given the title of the video you clicked on, you can probably see where this is going. Notice that at no point in the story did I mention the part where, shortly after the family was seated at their table, the waiter came around asking them to sign a multi-page contract agreement before dining, and that's because that doesn't happen. But what does happen is the good old magical Disney lawyers argued that this actually is what happened. Because, get this, Disney argued that way back in November of 2019, Jeffrey had created a Disney Plus account. I'm not kidding. And in creating that account, he had checked the box stating that he agreed to the subscriber agreement and Disney's terms of use. As Disney's lawyers pointed out, the subscriber agreement states that any dispute between you and us, except for small claims, is subject to a class action waiver and must be resolved by individual binding arbitration. The subscriber agreement also states that, quote, when you create a Disney Plus or ESPN Plus account, you also agree to the Walt Disney Company's terms of use. After combing through the unbelievably dense terms of use, the litigation section states the following. Quote, you and Disney DTC agreed to arbitrate as provided below all disputes between you, including any related disputes involving the Walt Disney Company or its affiliates that are not resolved informally, except disputes relating to the ownership or enforcement of intellectual property rights. So according to them, because he watched TV shows on a streaming service 4 years ago, he can now not take them to a trial after his wife died due to their negligence. I mean this wholeheartedly. This is not a joke or in Minecraft. This is real life, and I mean it. If that ever happened to me, there will be a body count. That'll play crazy in court. Legally, Disney had Jeffrey over a barrel. He did sign that agreement, but in any reasonable person's mind, the agreement is there to stop someone from sharing passwords or committing piracy. And the language is there, but most would assume that it's to prevent people from frivolously suing Disney for ruining their week with a poor live-action adaptation of one of their classic 2D animated films. Which, if you're making a live-action film but all of the main subjects are CGI, that's not live-action. You've just created a worse-looking animation. Or from filing a class-action suit against the company for jacking up the monthly prices on Disney Plus. And, you know, putting multiple commercial breaks in every movie while charging more for the ad-supported tier than one without ads just a couple years ago. But no rational person signing up for Disney Plus to watch an episode of Gargoyles or the Goofy movie would ever think that doing so would essentially grant a significant legal exception to some random restaurant 5 years later when it kills your wife. Like, could you imagine how devilish the attorneys have to be? Like, a guy's wife died and they're like, ha ha ha, look who watched the Book of Boba Fett. To really understand what they're trying to do here, it's important to dig further into why it would be so important for a company like Disney to settle a legal dispute by arbitration. With arbitration, a lot of bureaucracy regarding strict legal procedure is eliminated, including the discovery phase in which both sides have to turn over any records related to the dispute. Text, emails, other private communication, or things that a public entity probably wants to keep behind closed doors. Arbitration is also private and often binding, meaning there's far less opportunity to appeal. If, for example, you have the other party caught in a technical legal trap, like the one that Disney has over all its Disney Plus users, you would probably be better served by arbitration. With arbitration, you don't have to factor in issues like leaving your fate in the hands of a jury full of empathetic people, many of whom are probably also Disney Plus subscribers themselves, and also probably don't like the idea that lets the company kill their wife. You don't have to worry about documents found during discovery making their way to the press, making your company look bad. And best of all, if you win, the plaintiff has no recourse. There's nothing they can do about it. But it was during the weeks leading up to this case that Disney's kryptonite appeared, backing them to a corner and forcing their hand. And that is negative public sentiment. Around August 12th of 2024, news began to spread that Disney was using the legal language behind their digital streaming service as a shield for, once again, and I cannot stress this enough, killing someone's wife. Just about everyone seemed to agree that this was the ultimate scumbag move, and from the magic land of imagination, love, hope, and wonder, no less. The outrage was justified. There are 124.6 million Disney Plus subscribers in the United States, probably all of whom just wanted to watch The Mandalorian without giving up their rights to trial by jury. Gosh, that sentence is insane. I hate that this is where we live. Trial by jury you are giving up if they, once again, murder your wife. This story dominated the news with 120 straight hours of negative press for Disney. The public backlash grew so severe, in fact, that Disney backtracked on their request to move the case to arbitration and released a statement to get back in the good graces of the general public. While this was certainly welcome news to the family of the victims, Disney still proceeded with the court case itself. The matters have been kept tightly under wrap, but from what we could find, no settlement has been reached. For all we know, there hasn't even been an offer. Today, Raglan Road's menu has made a significant change to their website, adding the following disclaimer, quote, "We are not a gluten/allergen-free restaurant. We cannot guarantee that any dish we prepare is free from gluten/allergen or free from cross-contact. Guests must notify their server of any allergy-friendly request. A manager will then discuss our allergy menu with you. Guests must use their own discretion to make informed choices based on their individual dietary needs." Oh, so the place that advertised themselves as being like allergy-free actually updated to say that. Man, I bet there's one family that it would have been really cool if it said that earlier.
Mm.
Would you like to take a stroll on the beach with me? Wanna hear a summer story? Where are we going? There's no class today. Let's do something summery together. Oh, but no scary stories.
Mm.
Would you like to take a stroll on the beach with me? Don't frighten me like that! Let's do something summery together. Oh, but no scary stories.
Take a deep breath. The spotlight's about to shine. Is the concert starting? The anticipation off stage is the perfect prelude. Take a deep breath. The spotlight's about to shine. The anticipation off stage is the perfect prelude. Take a deep breath. The spotlight's about to shine. The anticipation off stage is the perfect prelude.
I can't wait to hear the sound of the sea! Where are we going? There's no class today. Got a new ghost story to share? I can't wait to hear the sound of the sea!
Okay, so it is a
Where are we
hearing
going?
aid.
There's no class today.
Yeah,
Wanna hear a summer story? Let's do
most
something
of the
summery
people
together.
are
Oh,
here
no
are
scary stories.
disabled in some way. Well, that was about half.
But from there, let's move on to the Disney of the gaming world, Nintendo. Imagine walking into a GameStop or Best Buy, swiping your debit card for $600, including a $90 game, and walking out with your brand new Switch 2. That sentence is technically incorrect, because from a legal perspective, according to Nintendo, you don't even own your console. You don't own your games, you don't own your downloads, your game saves, or even the content you make while using their software. And you never did. The moment you opened the box and fired up the device, you entered into a legally binding agreement that significantly restricts what you can and can't do with the console that you paid for. Why? You know why. Their end user license agreement. Now, to clarify a few things, as mentioned earlier, EULAs are not unique to Nintendo, although for reasons we'll get into, they tend to take the enforcement of these further than most other companies. Or at the very least, the stories of Nintendo taking action seem to surface more publicly than others. PlayStation's terms, for what it's worth, include language like, all rights to use system software are granted by license only. Xbox isn't any better, as they say, the Xbox software is licensed to you, not sold. Secondly, EULAs are not a recent invention either. Consoles and other devices have come with these for decades. But as tech devices become more and more integrated with online services, software license agreements become more critical to the user experience ingrained within these devices. There used to be a time when you bought a game, took it home, played it, beat it, and traded it in at GameStop, for a whole 74 cents. Now games are more and more online, requiring the use of paid services managed by the company who makes the console and some of the games in order to fully enjoy them. But it's also that very connectivity that creates the ethical conundrums. As companies can now access, change, and disable the service on your console, and since those services are becoming so essential, disabling them is like disabling the console itself. And that's one reason Nintendo has found themselves in the news lately. People have had their brand new $600 console bricked, banned, and disabled in various ways, sometimes for violations they didn't even commit. It's a slippery slope towards anti-consumerism, and just because other console makers may have done something similar in the past, that doesn't justify Nintendo from doing the same. In 2017, Nintendo's EULA for the original Switch served as the foundation of an upsetting trend that encroaches on some of the rights of consumers. At the time, it was relatively short, just 2,055 words and 9 sections, but it set a clear tone. Especially with the opening statement, quote, "The software is licensed, not transferred to you." That's Nintendo telling you definitively that you're not actually buying their games, you're renting them under their rules. But it only got worse from there. The license was described as non-exclusive and could be withdrawn at any time. In other words, if Nintendo felt like it, they could end your rights to use their software, with no obligation as to why. And when it came to software updates, the EULA stated they could change or delete content on your system without notice. If you had an unauthorized modification, well, your Switch could become completely unusable permanently. Now, your gut reaction might be to say, but Goon, they wouldn't, which also don't call me that, they wouldn't actually do that to their customers. And I understand the instinct. Who could imagine that they do it to their customers? But think about Disney. Think about what they tried to do. Again, killing a wife. And probably would have continued doing had there not been such a huge public outcry. I think it's safe to say that if a company can get away with something, they will. Take Apple, for example. Their EULAs have given them tremendous freedom to remove, change, or even add whatever they want to the devices people pay for. In 2014, you might remember the time that they downloaded a new album from U2 onto everyone's iPod. I remember having never heard of U2 in my life, but was really annoyed because anytime I tried to go to music on, I think it was my dad's phone, they were always there, just staring at me. The move was incredibly controversial, with Apple widely mocked for it. And it obviously angered users who weren't warned, didn't opt in, and didn't want their hard drive space taken up by an album they never bought. Apple eventually apologized, but they didn't do anything they weren't allowed to, because the iTunes EULA that people signed when they agreed to the terms of the iTunes Store said that Apple could do exactly that. So all the big tech companies do this, but there's another reason Nintendo's EULAs have made recent news. Sometime in or around November of 2019, as best as we can tell, they never gave it an official date, a brand new Section 7 was added to Nintendo's EULA called Dispute Resolution, Binding Individual Arbitration, Class Action Waiver, which if you were paying attention to the Disney thing, you probably see where this is going. Without reading the entirety of the legal verbiage, it says that if you have any dispute with Nintendo about your console, your account, your games, anything, it will not be resolved in court. Full language for this will be provided in the description if anyone's interested. Similar to the Disney Plus controversy, any disagreement with Nintendo goes to arbitration with a third party of Nintendo's choosing. That choice is always the American Arbitration Association. This is your only option. Remember how arbiters are supposed to be impartial? Well, Nintendo is saying pick from the pre-selected list of people we employ regularly. And there's also only one person on the list. A judge can help you, a jury can help you, and most importantly, you can't team up with other gamers in a class action lawsuit, pretty much no matter what Nintendo does. Or
Nintendo does.
so what can you do? Well, there is one matter of recourse. Within 30 days of buying your new Switch, you can mail a letter, a physical letter, to Nintendo to opt out of the arbitration, which, if you bought a Switch 2 console on launch day, is already too late to do. A lot of people have been reporting that the arbitration clause was new for the Switch 2, but the truth is that it's been in place for 5 years, although by 2025, the agreement had become a monster. What started as a quaint 9-section long agreement had blossomed into an albatross, featuring 21 sections of conditions that all play increasingly unfavorable for users. According to the updated agreement, Nintendo can revoke your entire license for any reason. That means your digital purchases, your online access, and yes, even certain games can be disabled. The clause is intentionally broad, defining Nintendo account service to include the eShop, online play, parental controls, and anything else that connects to your Nintendo account. And here's what's extra terrible. In the past, you may have been able to get around some of these potential issues by sticking to physical games only. But, new for the Switch 2, many physical games aren't even physical copies. They're merely game keys, empty plastic without the game copy on them. These keys are basically just a code that gives your console permission to play the game when the plastic is inside of the system. You still have to download the game itself from the eShop. I remember being a kid and going to GameStop and buying a game and coming home and then just playing the game. Combined with that, the issue of game servers being taken down, ending support for some games, and the ability to play them down the road, and the state of gaming in 2025 is a bit of a mess. No thanks, of course, to the practices of companies like Nintendo, Apple, Sony, or Microsoft. Alright, so I know I've been picking on Nintendo a bit in this video, but this next part is worth talking about and brings everything full circle, so bear with me. I also just don't like them. In July of 2019, a man named Ryan Diaz filed a class action complaint against Nintendo after his Joy-Con joystick started registering phantom movements. He had bought a Switch and an extra set of controllers, and less than a year later, the left stick was drifting on its own. If you're watching this video, you stay inside. You know what stick drift is. Diaz wasn't alone. This wasn't a one-off, it was a defect. A widely known defect. Reddit threads piled up with users showing their characters walking sideways without input. Reticles wandering off target, games unplayable due to a physical issue inherent to the design of the Joy-Cons. My wife likes to play the Switch a lot, and I know we've had at least 2 Joy-Cons that have had stick drift, which I feel like didn't happen nearly as much back in the days of Xbox or PlayStation. I mean, Xboxes and PlayStation still exist, but back when they were cool. Nintendo didn't respond publicly, but behind the scenes, they were scrambling. Just a few days later, they released the Switch Lite, console with built-in Joy-Cons that couldn't even be replaced. It was added to the lawsuit almost immediately because the same exact defect was showing up there too. And don't worry, since they're attached to the console, you can't get new ones. At this point, there were 2 options for Nintendo. 1. Admit fault and issue a recall for the defective joysticks, winning the respect of the gaming community. You already know they didn't do that one, so 2. Prepare for battle. It was here that Nintendo invoked their nuclear weapon, the giant red button on their desk. The arbitration clause. Remember that quiet EULA update from earlier in the year, the one that no one noticed? Well, this was its debut performance. Nintendo argued that by using the Switch, Diaz and everyone else had agreed to individual arbitration, no courtroom or jury, and more crucially, no right to class action. And because it's right there in the contract, the judge agreed. The contract everyone signed when they powered up their Switch for the first time prohibited them from any action. The non-negotiable mandatory contract for using the device. And just like that, the class action was buried. Behind closed doors, individual arbitrations took place far from public view. Nintendo didn't have to defend itself in front of a jury or release internal emails and engineering reports. By May of 2024, Diaz's team voluntarily dismissed the case. Even if Diaz won in arbitration, that was one individual case. It created no obligation for Nintendo to fix the controller of the millions of other users experiencing the same defect. And that might be one of the biggest issues of the millions of other users experiencing the same defect. And that might be one of the biggest issues with this now common order of events. When a corporation can hide behind arbitration, they aren't responsible for fixing their product. When the Switch 2 launched, many were stunned to discover that the widely suggested fix for stick drift using Hall effect joysticks that are immune to the defect weren't implemented in the Joy-Con 2. Maybe Nintendo managed to fix the problem without using Hall effect sticks, only time will tell. But the fact of the matter is that they don't have to. As long as the sticks last beyond the manufacturer's warranty, the best users can hope for is to engage Nintendo in a costly, lengthy, individual legal battle, or pony up another $90 for a replacement set. Forced arbitration and adhesion contracts aren't just limited to the entertainment brands. They are rampant in almost every aspect of life, from banking to rideshare services to dating apps and even employment. In 2020, the same year everything in the whole world caught on fire and exploded, forced arbitration ramped up. According to the American Association for Justice, both consumer and employee arbitration spiked during the pandemic. More claims were filed, but fewer people won. Just 577 consumers across the entire United States won a monetary award in arbitration in 2020. That is a 4.1% win rate, lower than the 5-year average of 5.3%. College applicants have a better shot at getting into MIT or Yale than winning an arbitration case. And for employees, it gets worse. Roughly 60 million workers are subject to arbitration clauses in their employment contracts. And in 2020, only 82 of them won any money at all. And I'll save you the time in reaching for a calculator. That is 0.0001%. Don't worry, if your company tries to kill you or almost kills you or once again kills your wife, you can't do anything about it. So you know, what's to worry? Here's a fun thing I bet you didn't know. 1 in 3 employment arbitration cases filed in 2020 were against, and I'm not kidding, Family Dollar or parent company Dollar Tree. Think about the size of the entire United States workforce, and then think that a third of all of those complaints are against a single dollar store conglomerate. Something else that's interesting is some companies have made their arbitration clauses so airtight that they trap themselves. Postmates, the food delivery service, insisted that its couriers were independent contractors, not employees, to avoid paying them benefits. But more than 10,000 of those contractors decided to take advantage of the arbitration clause Postmates had forced on them. This backfired spectacularly, as Postmates was now on the hook for millions in fees to process all those individual arbitration claims. And the same thing happened with DoorDash in late 2019, when over 5,000 couriers filed arbitration claims. DoorDash attempted to flip the table by going to court to request a class action instead, which I didn't even know companies could file class actions. That's terrifying. It's also ironic because the whole point of the arbitration thing is to keep the employees from doing a class action, so now you're doing a class action against them. The judge DoorDash went to, Judge William Alsup, wasn't having it. In a scathing ruling, William said, quote, "Faced with having to actually honor its side of the bargain, DoorDash now blanches at the cost of the filing fees it agreed to pay. This hypocrisy will not be blessed." And then there's Amazon, and I'm happy to tell you that all of their contract stuff is very nice to their employees, and everything is great, and there's no reason to talk about it. You've probably never read Amazon's condition of use agreement, the one you automatically accept when you use Alexa, shop on Prime, or even just browse their site. But buried in that agreement was a forced arbitration clause as well. Big surprise. Then came the lawsuits, 75,000 of them. Each one claiming Alexa devices had illegally recorded conversations without consent. For Amazon to start an arbitration case, it cost about $2,900 per claim. Multiply that by 75,000, and suddenly Amazon was staring down over $200 million in arbitration fees. And that's before any judgments or settlements. Which also, going back to the idea of having an arbiter or middleman negotiate these deals, when $200 million are on the line, how can they be impartial? Amazon almost immediately dropped the arbitration clause. Turns out corporations love arbitration until they're the ones forced to use it. So where do we stand in all this? Honestly, the goalposts keep moving and there's little change that you can do to keep up because you decided to watch the live action Snow White, so you kind of deserve it. Or do something like play Animal Crossing. With that, you signed away your rights. EULAs are living, breathing organisms that feed on the soul of consumers like you and me. Next time you blindly click accept, maybe read the full terms and conditions to understand what it is you're getting yourself into, then decide for yourself if it's really worth it. Just kidding. I mean, what are you going to do? Not use an iPhone or an Android or listen to music or play Call of Duty? No, there's only like one bit of advice I can give you that actually works. Click and pray. And the other piece of advice I can give you is that it's not really advice. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we just want to say thank you for watching. I'm glad I could finally get some violence against Disney and Nintendo out. It feels good. It feels good for the soul. I feel lighter. Thank you all for the support you've continued to show the channel. Again, everyone who is involved in the production of this video will be mentioned in the description. Be sure to show them some love. New content on the way. Be sure to check us out over at Wendigoon and Creepcast. And I believe that should do it for now, but we just want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye! Can I get like a EULA as a YouTuber? Can there be something like when you hit the subscribe button, you have to like, I don't know, be nice to me?
Superman's perfect nemesis. Detailed diatribe or a sarcastic production. So.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the least surprising detailed diatribe you'll see all year. That's right, we're back, baby. It's not just superheroes, it's our boy, Superman. Big Blue himself, not to be confused with regular Blue, also on this call.
Here comes the boy. It's Superman.
It's Superman. Superman is the boy. Lest I spoil my sentiment from the outset with this opening slide, suffice to say that we here at OSP are extremely pleased with the new 2025 Superman, directed by James Gunn. Good movie. Movie good.
Brett opened the slideshow and I started cackling.
Yeah, I'm sorry we weren't already recording. But yes, I mean, you know, there's a lot that's already been said about this movie in the short time since it came out. For the record, at time of recording, the movie's been out for less than 2 weeks. I'm banking this one early, to the point where I probably won't be able to get any footage from the movie to put in the slideshow outside of, like, trailer shots.
Oh, well.
So, yeah, this is probably the quickest turnaround I've ever had. What a rare treat.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I have a lot of thoughts about this movie. I have a lot of thoughts about some really interesting things they did in this movie. One of them being, is that supposed to be Atlantis on the left side of this one shot from the promotion? Because there's like a bunch of lights out in the ocean in a place where there really shouldn't be.
It looks like, shape-wise, that looks like Iceland, but it's on the wrong
It's on the
ocean.
wrong side.
So I don't know what they're doing.
My money's on Atlantis.
I swear to God, that looks like Iceland. I don't know why it's on the left.
Yeah, we've had one, yes. But, yeah, so we are, I promise, we're not just going to gush about the various things in this movie that we like. There have been other opportunities for us to do that, at least at the time this video is going up. So instead, I am intending to scope in and talk about one specific thing I think this movie nails. But of course, before that, a blanket spoiler warning, everything's on the table. We're not setting out to talk about every part of this movie. I just know how we work. So the odds
We
are
might drive
pretty
by
good.
a lot of different parts of this movie.
Yeah.
I do think before we scope in too far, it is worth kind of doing a rundown of, like, check back in with all the various thesis statements we've made on this show.
Funny
over the
you should
years. God
ask
fucking
that.
damn it.
So before we get in, you know, obviously 10 out of 10 no notes, let's move on. But let's explain why it's 10 out of 10 no notes, let's move on. This Superman is the ultimate firefighter. His #1 priority through every fight scene is saving lives. He's constantly working to find the best way to help absolutely everybody. Whenever he's the only one doing the fight, he's mostly like catching things that are falling on people and trying to move the fight away from civilians. The first major fight in this movie with the big kaiju that starts attacking Metropolis is notably much more chaotic after the Justice Gang joins in, and suddenly, like, shit's getting broken en masse. Civilians are in far more danger because when Superman is the one choreographing the fight, he's doing a lot to save lives.
He punches the monster in one direction and then flies behind it to stop it from smashing into a building.
Exactly, yeah. So this Superman is 100% fixated on saving lives, and it is convincingly challenging for him, despite his impressive power set. Like, even in that specific fight, Mr. Terrific is like, all right, what's going on? And Superman is like, yeah, the problem is I'm trying to figure out a way to end this fight by moving this thing out of the city, even though I can't just, like, pick it up because it's clearly very, very heavy. But I don't want to kill it or even hurt it too badly. And Mr. Terrific is like, are you fucking serious? And then just kills it in the most painful way possible. And Superman is like, ugh. So
The look of anguish on his face. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah. On that note, Superman is a profoundly sincere character in this movie, so there's no satire to be found anywhere. It really does feel like James Gunn went into this movie starting on the premise that Superman does not need a justification to try and be a good person. And the movie doesn't act like wanting to help people is this weird concept that needs to be clarified or this embarrassing thing that needs to be worked around. It's just like, no, this Superman is a profoundly sincere, openly kind of corny dude. One of the first things he says in this movie is golly, shortly followed by,
I was gonna say that
what
he
the
says
hey,
golly,
dude?
right?
Yeah. He's the most Midwestern.
Two things on that. One is that I watched an interview with James Gunn to prep for this, and he mentioned that he basically took the kind of like core cast out to dinner before they started shooting the movie and said, like, this is a film about goodness, and that definitely seeps out of every single frame and is so profoundly woven into every aspect of the film. But also, we might touch on this later, the corniness of Superman and that aspect of his character is so clearly demonstrated in the trunks, which is something that I don't know if we've talked about on Detailed Diatribes before, but we are both absolute, like, trunks gang on this, because if you are not willing to have your Superman wear trunks and look a little silly, you are not willing to have a Superman who is Superman.
Yeah.
And when they were working on this, David Corenswet talks about the process of working on the costume and developing it, and how James wanted the trunks in theory, but couldn't find one that like looked good and looked correct. And David said, like, listen, he's allowed to look a little silly. If the trunks make him look kind of doofy, that might be the intended effect, because Superman wants children to be able to come up and talk to him.
Yep.
And he literally said, like, to ask him for directions.
Yeah, or like help
as
with
if
their
Superman
homework.
could just like fly up and be like, it's that way.
Yeah.
But it's so clearly part of what he wants.
Yeah, well, because of course, like the image of Superman, for a lot of people, they're like, oh my god, I love Superman. He's so cool. And the thing about cool is that when it's a value judgment, you know, from the outside, it's like, oh yeah, that person's really cool, I like him. When it's attempting to be manifested from the inside, it immediately becomes pretense and 100 times less cool. When you're trying to look cool, people can tell, and they will immediately think it's uncool. But the thing is, usually that's because trying to look cool is an effort to avoid looking uncool. It's this idea that like, oh, well, if I do this thing, people won't think I'm cool anymore. You know, it's motivated by fear, and people can tell. So when you have all these attempts to make Superman cool, you know, serious, badass, so nobody thinks you're corny for liking him, you strip off the trunks, because then you can just put him in a cool alien armor bodysuit, and it's like, yeah, that's right, nobody thinks this guy's uncool. But the thing is, Superman does not actually like need people to think he's cool. Superman is a very like action motivated person. You know, he does things. He doesn't super fixate on how he's perceived, and we will get into this part later. But the trunks are kind of just like emblematic of like how willing is the writer to let Superman look like a bit of a dork, because ultimately that has no bearing on like the good he does. It has no bearing on how much people like him or care about him, or you know, the good he does in the world. The only thing is, do you think he's a little bit uncool if he wears them? And if he can tolerate being a little bit uncool, this is a solid version of Superman. And this version of Superman can absolutely tolerate being a little bit uncool. They managed to really like walk that line. There's a bunch of other stuff that this movie does that absolutely hits the bullseye. The things we've been identifying that a lot of other superhero movies have been sort of struggling with, this movie makes it look easy. One of them being, my primary complaint about the multiverse problem is that it invokes this sort of feeling of like nihilistic neutrality, of like if entire universes can get wiped off the map and we kind of just don't even register it, then we're not really valuing the collateral damage or the worth of a life. If we're, you know, one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic, and then, you know, a million multiverses is like that times a bunch. This story values life in all its forms to a painful degree. There is no need to do any sort of like mass threat to motivate the story, because even a single life of any kind holds unimaginable worth in this paradigm, which is really good. It turns out it was that easy. Also, this world is extremely busy. This is not an empty world, and Superman is not the only hero in town. This world is absolutely chock-a with shit for them to do. Like, Superman is a latecomer in this world. There have been metahumans active for 300 years at the start of the movie, so Superman just kind of like showed up, joined an existing paradigm, and is just kind of trying to like do his best within the framework that already exists, and is just sort of unintentionally reframing everything by presenting a paragon of like goodness and simple hope that the current version kind of doesn't have, but we'll get to that later. In short, this movie absolutely checks off all of the bullet points of the stuff that we have specifically been wanting out of a superhero movie. Like, is this objectively the best superhero movie ever made? I'm not going to make any statements on that. Is this exactly the movie I wanted? Yes. Target audience me.
Built for OSP
Yes.
and no one else.
I did also want to hire a few of the other checkboxes. James Gunn, he's got his Gunnisms, and you better believe they're all on full display in this movie. You will see gratuitous harm to an eyeball a bunch.
Yeah.
You will get attached to this little furry bastard with personality issues. You will think it's really cool when this dude with a remote control drone that leaves a little red light trail in the air takes out a bunch of guys with a needle drop in the background.
Yep.
Your biological parents will turn out to suck, but the good news is your adoptive father will be there to talk you through it, and also Nathan Fillion is there. So now that we've got all of the boxes checked, let's talk about the part of this movie that I wasn't really expecting to have opinions about, and that being our bald boy himself, Lex Luthor, gold medalist in the Hater Olympics.
Lex Luthor saw the Kendrick and Drake rap beef and called Kendrick an amateur.
Oh boy. First of all, before we start getting into Lex himself, let's compare him to some of the other big names in the superhero, supervillain narratives, because there have been a lot of superhero movies, and almost every single one of them has been anchored on a supervillain of some kind, with varying degrees of effectiveness. quality. We all have strong opinions about how they did Venom in Spider-Man 3, but we also all have strong opinions about how they did Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2, and Magneto in the older X-Men movies, and, everybody loves Zod. So, like...
Do they?
What?
Does everyone love Zod?
Well, I mean, yeah, Kneel Before Zod and all that jazz. Like, he's got good panache, and
I have not seen the panache. As someone who does not read the comics and has only seen Man of Steel, I have not seen the panache.
Not that Zod. Fucking Christopher Reeve Zod. Kneel Before Zod. This guy and the slideshow. There he is on the left. We can't overstate how much the Christopher Reeve Superman movies are beloved. I've watched the first two, and I gotta say, this movie has a lot of very deliberate homages to the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. You can really tell it was a labor of love, down to like the emblem on the cape. That's why it's there. Down to the scene where Clark and Lois are hanging out in her apartment and he's in Clark mode, but he doesn't have the glasses on. That is very straight out of Superman 2 after she's figured out his identity. It's clearly a very loving homage to a lot of the elements of the Christopher Reeve movies that people like. And Zod is one of those things, even though the ending of that movie is a little bit ridiculous. Anyway, what makes a supervillain good at being bad? This is an interesting question. Making a hero good at being good is already hard enough. How do you make a character who's compelling while doing all of the wrong things? The goofus to our gallant. How are we supposed to make this work? I think that there are a few things that we can, sort of break down into a nice little bulleted list. The 5 E's of what makes a good villain truly evil. I do think the first one of those is rooted in the fact that this is a bad person. So how does this character examine the nature of morality? A villain is more than just an antagonist. Antagonist just means, opposes the protagonist. Villain is a value judgment of, like, the morality of this character. So a villain embodies in some way a moral wrongdoing, a good bad example of what not to be. So they do bad things, but like, why? What do they want? What is the bad thing they're doing? Are they anchored in active malice? Are they making some kind of mistake? Are they misguided? What do they have any moral limits? If they come up to the line, do they stop or do they cross it? What are we doing here? A villain also exposes the heroes to new challenges. In certain ways, a supervillain is a tool to reveal new things about the superhero they're dealing with. Villains will come into the story with like new weird powers, new devices that are capable of new scary evil things, stuff the hero hasn't dealt with before, so that they aren't an already solved problem. So if the villain is capable of putting the hero in newly unpleasant situations, that's pretty solid. So, a good supervillain presents a novel threat. For instance, Spider-Man 2, everyone holds that one up as like the really good one. In the first movie we had, well, everyone, asterisk, holds that one up as a really good one. In the first movie we had Green Goblin. And Green Goblin and Doc Ock have a lot of similarities. They are both somewhat unhinged. A villainous personality has been induced in them by mad science. But like, just in terms of sheer choreography, Green Goblin is just an absolute force of chaos. Doc Ock has a motivation. He's trying to like build his like fusion reactor science project thing, which will be bad, but like he's obsessed with this thing that he was fixated on before he became evil. Like with Norman, it's like, oh, Norman might still be in there, but Norman was also kind of a jerk. Whereas in this case, it's like, oh no, Dr. Octavius is still in there and we want to save him. This is a new kind of thing for Spider-Man to deal with. Also, just choreography-wise, Goblin had a lot of devices. He could fly around. He had his like explodey things. Doc Ock is a much more like tactile, hands-on fighter because he's got the tentacle situation. So the choreography is completely different. This is a novel threat. Even just from the space of one movie to the next, we are suddenly dealing with an entirely new kind of problem. Of course, one of the greatest things a supervillain can do is contrast with the hero and in the process elucidate their characterization.
I like how hard you work to get these 5 E's.
I was putting in the fucking work. Initially, I wanted to figure out a way to make them just spell out evil, but I was like, no, I can make this easier on myself. Anyway, so it contrasts. A supervillain contrasts with the hero. The points of these two characters that are similar highlights the points of them that are so very, very different. And because a villain is usually diametrically opposed to the hero along at least one axis of their characterization, this opposition reveals properties of both characters. Like, it's possible to have two characters that are somewhat different, but not like exact opposites. Usually you will have a supervillain who is in some way quite similar to the hero and in some ways exact opposites. For instance, I've got Magneto on here, and in the early movies, the thing with Magneto is that he is absolutely ruthless, in contrast with Charles Xavier, who is very somewhere between compassionate and like timid, does not want to like hurt people, only wants to, defend his people, whereas of course Magneto's like, I'm also defending my people, but the best defense in some cases is turning a senator into goo. So, you've got these points of contrast. They are similar in some ways, they can understand each other in some ways, but they are also so very different in a way that heightens both elements of their characterization. Of course, one element of a supervillain that has become strangely less popular in recent years for some reason is that they have to explode spectacularly. Villains exist to be defeated defeated in a satisfying way. Again, antagonists, you can do whatever you want with an antagonist, but a villain usually exists to be beaten. That means you build them up in such a way that when they break down, it's really cool and fun. I say this has become strangely unpopular, and I am specifically subtweeting the exact movies you think I am. I was very confused by the choices they made in Infinity War and Endgame, where they were like, step 1, we let the villain win. Step 2, we take out the villain unceremoniously and then replace him with a version that has none of the character development and pathos with these characters, and then we let them have the big final fight. So it's just profoundly unsatisfying in like 8 different ways for some strange reason. The fall of a supervillain is supposed to be the big finish and the cathartic finale. It might be a little bit bittersweet. Again, Doc Ock is a pretty good example, but like it has to be fun to watch them fail in some way. You know, that's part of why villains are so prone to gloating, because gloating is a very dangerous thing for a character to do. It makes you want to see them eat those words.
Yeah, it's basically they're placing a bet that the story dictates they must lose, which is much more satisfying than if they simply like quietly get shuffled away into Arkham Asylum or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I saw someone point out that video game bosses, they feel like these like insurmountable threats, but they aren't designed to be defeated. They're designed to be defeated in a way that feels earned and satisfying, but they're built to lose. In a certain way, a lot of these antagonistic forces are designed by the writer to lose. If you're playing like a TTRPG and your like DM has the villain and they're giving them their big final monologue, it's like, let them do that. They're saying goodbye. They know that villain's not making it out of this fight. A villain exists to be defeated. They are a narrative device. They aren't, you know, a person who might win. They're a tool. Also, extremely powerful Riz. This part is self-explanatory. There's an X factor in what makes a supervillain good, and it is how much you're just like, oh my god, this guy fucking rules. And it's kind of hard to control for. But it does, you know, it factors in. Yeah, so those are my 5 E's of what makes a supervillain truly evil. I don't know if you have anything you want to throw in, make a few more E's in that evil.
You touch on a lot of stuff that obviously comes from some other detailed diatribes, but also some things that are more from the trope talks, Magnificent Bastards and such.
Yep.
Spectacular third act breakdowns. Yeah, I think this is insofar as we are choosing 5 E's for evil, I think this makes sense and works.
Hell yeah.
There is so much larger of a conversation about like, why aren't villains fun anymore? And we had the Radigan clip from the podcast.
Yeah.
Of, like the old
Radigan,
Disney
my boy
villains.
Radigan. The best villain.
When stories were in a sense simpler and we didn't have to go through all this effort at making the villain sympathetic, and I think we confused the difference between a villain having an understandable motivation and making sense internally, and us as the audience having to concede that the villain is right about some number of points. There's an overlap in there, and James Gunn has talked about, like, in Lex's fucked up worldview, he's doing the right thing, but it is a fucked up worldview that is evil and bad and predicated on malice and jealousy.
Yeah.
Whereas we get a little bit dicey in some of our, like, you know, Black Panther, Killmonger is mostly right.
Mostly right. Unfortunately, making
and we have
far
to do
too many
narrative
good points.
backflips to be like, oh, hold on, we put all the rhetorical gas in the bad guy. Okay, back up. And then the narrative has to do all these weird kind of like backflips and half measures and band-aids to make the hero actually correct in the end.
Yeah.
And teach them a lesson that they have to change in some way that is like, now we are simply going to be the exact point that the villain was making, but we're going to kill less people about it. Okay, I see what you're doing. Not great storytelling there.
There's a truism that gets bandied around a lot in writing, which is everyone is the hero of their own story, and I feel like it's been somewhat misinterpreted to lead to a sort of wave of like, there's no villain in this story, there's just antagonists, and, you know, everything will sort of be like unpacked in a certain way, or this way or that way or whatever. Like, surprise, the twist villain, you know, has no riz, no charisma because
Yeah, I don't want to continue watching this video right now. What do I want to do right now? There are a couple of videos.
All things come to an end,
Serial
even time
Worlds
itself.
of Single Panel Comics by Solar Sands. Wow. That is something that I would love to watch, but it probably would require...
The single-panel comic is a limited type of artwork. It challenges the artist to tell an often comedic, visually simple, and clear story within the boundary of a single, still frame. Save for the caption at the bottom. When done well, this profound... Save for the caption at the bottom. When done well, this profound limitation can result in profound efficiency. And The Far Side is one of the most tightly crafted and most revered comics to ever run. It is also one of the most surreal. One cartoon features a woman explaining how she embedded her husband in concrete in the middle of their living room. Another illustrates she embedded her husband in concrete in the middle of their living room. Another illustrates a safari team driving through a wildlife preserve filled with exotic animals trapped in enormous glass jars. A factory filled with chickens produces deflated rubber men. Men and women in glasses peek out of prairie dog holes. These cartoons beg the question, was The Far Side always this bizarre? Well, yes. Yes, it was. Before being called The Far Side, it was called Nature's Way, with a focus on making fun of and subverting the expectations of nature. Gary Larson was influenced by publications like Mad Magazine and Gay Ann Wilson, a regular Playboy, National Lampoon, and The New Yorker comic artist who dealt with the dark and surreal. Before Mad and Wilson, there was the gag cartoon. Some of these old gag cartoons are so effective and timeless, they look like they could come out today. Nature's Way primarily employed the animal kingdom, but even this wide subject matter would prove to be too narrow for Gary Larson's imagination. After a name change and syndication by Chronicle Features, it became The Far Side. Anyone who's read The Far Side will pick up on its common themes. Role reversal, where humans act like animals and animals act like humans. The supernatural. The prehistoric. The extraterrestrial. Nearly everyone in The Far Side is fat. Every human is a mound of dough with a pill-shaped head. In fact, everything in the comic looks obese and ridiculous. From animals to cars to planes. Even the waves illustrated here more resemble rolls of fat. Gary Larson could be very particular about the details in his comics. For example, when he didn't quite think the animals were appropriate in this cartoon, he switched them to bears. Since they can walk on their hind feet were appropriate in this cartoon, he switched them to bears. Since they can walk on their hind feet and more resemble a group of guys standing around. The timing of the scene matters too. In the sketch version of this joke about a sheep getting sheared right before a date, it shows what the sheep is thinking during the shearing. However, in the final version, Larson moved forward in time and showed the aftermath of the shearing. Many of his jokes revolve around forward in time and showed the aftermath of the shearing. Many of his jokes revolve around taking a snapshot of just before or just after a significant event, either building tension or making you wonder about what led up to whatever absurd thing just occurred. Sometimes the pose of one character matters a great deal, like in this cartoon where horses are introduced to America and one horse points to the scenery like a tourist. Larson felt this expression made the cartoon, and couldn't be changed like the poses of the others could be. In one case, the syndicate removed the last two letters of this caption, horrifying Larson, since he believed turning yee-haw into yee could confuse readers into thinking the people are yelling this, not the aliens, prompting him to request a correction. Some cartoons don't always hit the mark, like this one of a therapist speaking to a single angry eye, which I at first thought belonged to the couch itself come to life. But this detail didn't quite survive size reduction when printed.
Where do we come?
There is a sense of misanthropy in these comics, or at least a perspective where humans and animals are on equal footing. Animals will be concerned with the trivialities of domestic life. Human delinquents will be put in a zoo for display, complete with cave. Even the presumably brightest minds humanity has to offer frequently engage in childish behavior. Some comics can be weirdly poignant, even critical of humans' relationship with nature. On the other hand, humans and animals can be shown to live in shocking harmony. What is most consistent, however, is Larson's use of the surreal, his ability to turn any everyday situation on its head. Larson's most infamous cartoon has to be Cow Tools, a drawing of a cow in front of a table filled with various unidentifiable tools, except for one that is vaguely shaped like a handsaw. Larson said of this cartoon, "A week after it was published back in 1982, I wanted to crawl into a hole somewhere and die," because he received so many distress messages from people asking what on earth it meant. But the key is there is no key. The cow tools don't mean anything because we humans don't know what cow tools would do or why cows would need them. The cartoon simply imagines a world in which cows develop tools just like humans did. There's something delightfully nonsensical about this comic. You wonder what the two-pronged hoe thing is for, or what these half-spheres with weird protrusions do. Like trying to connect Rene Magritte's titles to his paintings, it's a stimulating exercise in trying to find meaning where there is none. Heathcliff may at first look like a knockoff Garfield, but in many ways he's his own distinct creation. Heathcliff doesn't talk. He's much more of a menace, and the strip was started by George Gately in 1973, 5 years before the debut of Garfield. For more than 2 decades, the jokes in Heathcliff relied on Heathcliff misbehaving and indulging in antics. Each comic contained a simple, understandable gag. But when Gately and his partner John Gallagher aged out of producing the strip, it was taken over by Peter Gallagher, after apprenticing under his uncles for 5 years. After Peter assumed creative control, the humor gradually became more strange and cryptic. Let me show you a modern Heathcliff comic.
All things
Don't get
come
it?
to an end.
Think about it for a second.
Time itself.
Well, a cat is in a deli shop. That's a bit strange, but not funny on its own. He's wearing a helmet with the word ham on it. Is the helmet made of ham? Does the helmet signify what he's thinking about? Is ham something he wants? The man at the counter says, "I'd order the turkey." Therefore, Heathcliff must in some way be punishing those who order ham? It could be that. It could also be nonsense.
A lot of people with the helmets, they're like, well, what is the helmets are something he wants? And I'm like, I don't know, I just do what if something funny could be on the helmet, I like doing that. I don't know, it could be something.
He's wearing a helmet.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
it.
Yeah.
Like, that's the explanation, right?
Right.
Sometimes a helmet is just a helmet.
That's right,
Right.
yeah.
If you believe there is some secret meaning, feel free to tell me. But when I first saw some of these modern Heathcliff comics, I thought they were made by an artist who had drawn comics for so long. Heathcliff Comics I thought they were made by an artist who had drawn comics for so long that they had completely lost their mind. The ham thing doesn't come from nothing. There are actually many recurring themes in the comic that can go back years. Ham, dirt, beef, meat, helmets, they all have a history. Take the garbage ape, for example. It started out in 2008 as a joke on the ridiculousness of the Easter Bunny, but the garbage ape continued to make appearance after appearance, bringing unwavering joy to the cats of Heathcliff. The official description for the garbage ape is, "The mysterious garbage ape comes at night to bring delicious garbage, much to the delight of hungry Heathcliff and his pals. He has never been seen by humans. Is he real?" Jimmy is another recurring character, a small, green, blank-faced frog that Heathcliff constantly tries to promote, but the popularity of Jimmy events is always inexplicably low. So why did Peter Gallagher take it in this direction? When apprenticing under his uncles, they once told him, Look, Heathcliff's been around for a long time. What you're going to do is ideas that we've already done. That's the first thing that's going to happen. We've done so many ideas about a cat cartoon that you're going to repeat, and so we can't use those. The need for innovation was apparent. In another episode, Peter Gallagher explained, I would bring them a group of gags. They would go through them and tell me, all right, not this one. And I was like, oh, I thought you would think this one's really funny. And they're like, don't do what you think we think is funny. You should do what you think is funny. And so he did. Sometimes this would result in a theme week, where a set of comics would be made for that week that would all have the same theme. A young woman once told Gallagher, when you did Dirt Week, my boyfriend called me. He's like, I can't believe it. I think it's on. I think it's gonna be Dirt Week. With Heathcliff, you don't think about a setup or a punchline. You think about a comical story. You think about how this world operates and how things got to be the way they are. It's unpredictable because some of these comics make perfect sense. Some may require background knowledge, and others are completely indecipherable. It's remarkably like The Far Side, especially Cow Tools, though more reliant on inside jokes and recurring characters. There's also a delight in the strangeness of it all. This Heathcliff cat tree tower thing could fit right in a de Chirico painting. Heathcliff isn't that obscure of a property. It had its own animated series. Successful newspaper comics can be run for so long that they become zombie versions of themselves, where they repurpose old comics again and again with slight changes to keep up with the times, without ever really evolving. But Heathcliff has avoided this fate by kind of turning into a different comic. I wouldn't call myself a Heathhead, but I admire this adaptation instead of stagnation. I think my favorite modern-day single-panel comic has to be Pants. Josh McCouch's cartoon series constantly features these old, small-faced men and tiny gremlins that look like cuter versions of Stephen Gammell creatures. All the line work is scraggly and uneven, and the writing for these comics is nothing short of genius. It's hard to explain why I find all of these hilarious. I think Josh McCouch just has an intuitive sense of what works in this world and how to structure jokes according to its weird rules. Take this comic, for example. What really makes it work to me is the teapot's demoralized face. Or with this one, the power stance of the man just completes it. Or with this comic, details such as the custom sign and the hesitant look of the soup holder really tie everything together and make you wonder about the events that led up to this point. Or you have comics that focus in on the mundane with no obvious punchline, but still function perfectly off the strangeness of the art style. He's even able to use color to highlight the focus of a joke. Pants, of course, has its own set of recurring themes, like butts, spanking, tiny cowboys, hooves, painting and drawing. Toilets, fairies, and groups of people with the same interest or accessory. There are plenty of cartoons in the series that have more traditionally funny gags, but I think a lot of the qualities of this comic come from the universe McCouch has created. The element of surprise is a fundamental of comedy, and a fundamental of surrealism. Once you have a setup, comedy. And a fundamental of surrealism. Once you have a setup, by switching the expected reveal with an unexpected one that still makes some sense, you achieve that mind-blown feeling that ideally results in laughter or contemplation. That's my theory for why a lot of Sunday funnies just aren't funny. You see the traditional comic art style, you see it's two kids or some family members talking, and you know the punchline is going to be some kind of schlock. You know that no matter what, Garfield is going to be lazy and gluttonous. Odie is going to be abused by Garfield. John Arbuckle is going to be a lame dweeb, and you know all the punchlines are going to be based off these unchanging characteristics. These same jokes have been told so many times that even the subversions of these characteristics have been played out. Worse, these jokes are always told in the same standard, boring way. These kinds of comics are fine if you want to be charmed by these characters doing what they do in your Sunday newspaper, but they aren't surprising. Their humor is limited. With The Far Side, Modern Heathcliff, and Pants, you don't know what's going to happen. The Far Side will always hit you with some kind of absurd scenario, and if the scenario isn't absurd, you know you're going to be hit with an unexpected caption. When a newspaper screwed up and switched the captions of a far be hit with an unexpected caption. When a newspaper screwed up and switched the captions of a Far Side and a Dennis the Menace comic, I found the humor of the Dennis the Menace comic to be much improved. If not, at least a little more interesting. In fact, I was so inspired by this that, with some help from Fudo, I created a website that would randomly take comics from one series and switch the bottom caption with that of another, or just switch captions at random. Introducing the Comic Caption Swapper. It is purely a tool that switches captions at random, so 90% of the new comics will be nonsense. But for what it's worth, I think these are pretty amusing. Some of them are oddly depressing. If you want to play with it before someone takes using, some of them are oddly depressing. If you want to play with it before someone takes it down for copyright, you can. Just click the link below or go to comicswap.art. It also works on mobile. You can screenshot any funny ones you find and send them to me on Discord, Twitter, or Polycentric if you're worried about copyright. This would be a good time to mention I was once inspired by The Far Side and made my own comics in middle school. This one I think is the best. Anyway, across 50 years of Heathcliff's run, its art style has remained remarkably consistent. Modern Heathcliff maintains this typical comic art style but hits you with a type of humor that is not usually associated with that style. The style leads you to believe you're going to get an obvious, probably dated and corny joke, but then you read the caption, and you're slapped in the face with, "He's going way over the ham limit." The surprise is you think it's going to make sense. Like there's going to be some kind of ham-based pun, but the caption is only an extra piece of information which does nothing to clarify the joke. It's like an anti-comic. Pants' jokes don't have to be insanely genius, though they are. The way he draws the characters and the situations these characters find themselves in are strange enough on their own to warrant being surprised. And of course, details matter. Being strange on its own isn't enough, lest you fall into the trap of random therefore funny. Execution matters just as much. Pants is filled with storytelling details. Gary Larson would agonize over things like timing, the pose of a single character, and the exact wording of a caption in order to best deliver the joke. Heathcliff, I think, can lean a bit too much into being random without substance on occasion, but there's still plenty of well-executed jokes in the series, as well as meta-cartoons that build on previous jokes. Peter Gallagher also emphasizes again and again that he does not want to spoil any reoccurring jokes by indulging in them too many times. To be surprising is to figure out how to deal with the ravages of time. You have to know when a joke or even a series has run its course. The Far Side ended when Gary Larson felt it should have ended. Heathcliff has evolved. Pants has just begun. During this time, each of these comics have built their own universes, complete with common rules and recurring subjects, yet are still able to lend themselves to the unexpected. These artists have not only crafted a place where a style can be built, but also a familiar landscape where the same idea can be riffed on in multiple ways, but never overplayed. All great artists had common themes they returned to again and again. Even the endlessly creative surrealist Rene Magritte frequently returned to mirrors, apples, partially cloudy blue skies, stone objects, and windows, but remixed them in novel ways. It can be immensely difficult to come up with a brand new idea every day. so it helps a lot if you have some common themes to bank on. When your world gets too crazy, it helps to know you can always put on a helmet. You may not know that before making The Far Side his full-time job, Gary Larson worked for some time as an investigator for his local humane society. This interest in animals certainly contributed to the focus of animals in his comics, which featured tall chickens, domestic cows, and other farmyard shenanigans. Unfortunately, in real life, farm animals are not equal to humans, which is why we must try our best to fight for them. I'm happy to say this video is not sponsored by FarmKind. Over 99% of farmed animals in the US are raised on factory farms.
Okay. Ethan Klein squashes Reddit mods by Legal Mindset.
Okay. Let me pull up this one. So this is, I got this off of X earlier today. Ethan reveals the H3 Stark bands banded together and hired the same law firm to fight against the subpoena request. So I'll play this 2-minute clip. Let me get this presentation and make sure the sound is on. Okay, there we go. Cool.
Surprised by this. We heard from the legal counsel of a new app, someone who we haven't heard from before. The H3 Snark mods have banded together and hired a boutique law firm located in San Francisco, which makes me raise my eyebrow.
What makes it boutique?
It just means like a small specialized. Okay. They seem like professionals.
Okay,
they usually are.
Yes, a boutique law firm in San Francisco to represent all of them. And the reason they've hired this lawyer is to challenge our subpoena request.
They don't want names.
They're scared.
I think he meant quash, right? Because he sometimes just slips up. I think he meant quash, but I'll give him that one because squash is also enough. Like just it's good enough. It's close enough. It's close enough, Ethan. I gave him over saying amendable instead of amenable, but it's all right.
They're scared. Whatever's in there must be bad.
I respect H3 Snark, and I believe that they're being silent.
Shut up, Adam. But the truth is, all we actually are asking for and need is their names so that we can serve them, right? So they're going to have to do this motion to squash, which is very interesting. It's going to essentially, they're going to have to argue on behalf of the three defendants that what they did was not infringement, to therefore make themselves ineligible to be subpoenaed. So they have to, it's going to be basically a motion to dismiss in the form of a squash because they have to argue that argument on behalf of them. So it's going to be this is going to happen sooner than all the other stuff, and it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out because I think it's going to establish where this whole thing is going. Because if the judge says no to that, it's this.
That's literally. I'm gonna pause this. Every time he's saying it, I'm literally thinking about squash. Yeah, exactly. Like it's because it's quash. It's quash. It's quash. But squash.
I believe it's the same judge that's on Denham's case.
Yeah, it's going to be the same judge. It's all in that case.
Then that is not looking good for Denham. If the judge grants it, then it's like they don't think we have a case, right? If the judge denies it, it means they're all fucked.
They're
frankly.
fucked, yeah.
And so
that's where we're going with that. Squash aside, what are your thoughts on that, Sean?
Well, they're gonna. I mean, they're better off arguing the contributory copyright infringement isn't there, because making the litigation for the three girls, that's not really going to get them anywhere, I don't think. But they're better off trying to argue, they didn't contributory copyright infringe. But I don't see how you're going to get anywhere because there hasn't been any discovery yet. We're literally at the pleading stage, and the parties that are actually the main parties in this are not saying that they're ready for summary judgment yet. So I don't see how they were going to get anywhere with this. And remember, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because all the girls give up your phones. You know, we subpoenaing all your shit off your phone. I want access to your Reddit account. I mean, so they can fight and moan. Remember, there's multiple ways they're going to get this information. Number one, and then number two, I'm sure Ethan's got, you know, his attorney. You know, they're going to do their sneaky stuff. Like you are not invisible on the internet, guys. You are not, and that's why like people are like, you know, am I worried about, you know, like when I'm on Twitter, people talk. I'm like, you could find me in 30 seconds if you want to. Yeah, but I make it that like there is protection in being known.
Yes, there is protection being known. There's protection being unknown, and once again, you know, people say, oh, it's try to be invisible. It's like, no, just, you know, put a little like a speed bump, right? You know, it's not even a stop. It's not stopping anybody, right? It's like, do you care to actually go find out, right? And if people care to find out, they'll find out, you know, and that's just a reality of the internet, right? But yes, the reality is it's also quash, reject, or void, especially legal procedures. So just so you know, guys, we're educational and entertaining, guys.
I mean, I'm sure Ethan and will bring up, you know, do you have the standing to have to do this?
Well, that's a good another question. Issue. I think they do. I would be on the side of they do because they're parties to the lawsuit. So how would the mods not?
Well, how do you know? How do we know you're a party to the lawsuit? I mean, that's right. Like, look, you're gonna have to tell us who you are.
Yeah.
You're not gonna be able to fight. You're not gonna be able to. Fair enough. I don't know if they're not gonna be able to proceed under a pseudonym at some point because
they will have to.
It's unlike Pixie.
Stipulate that. Yes.
Yeah. Unlike Pixie, we know who Pixie is. Like Destiny knows. Like now, maybe I am retarded and I'm wrong, but that's the argument I'm doing. Well, I'm sure Ethan's.
Could this be a double bind for that? I mean, this could be like an Ethan, like 4D chess move here. Is like them going together into this law firm, they're gonna have to stipulate that this is indeed them.
Yeah.
Oh, they are so.
I mean, because if they're going to claim we didn't engage in contributory copyright infringement, and we didn't do this, we didn't do that, it's like, well, we need to do discovery to find that out. We now have to depose you.
Right.
So now you got to tell me who you are.
Right.
I mean, I mean, this idea that they're going to jump in like this, like they were sitting there laughing that the judge was never going to grant this. Why wouldn't the judge grant the motion for a subpoena if both sides agree they have no reason to get involved? If the plaintiff and the defendant agree to something, you know, the judge is never going to get in the way of that. Why? Yeah. His life is easier. What do I got to do? Hold on. What? Sign this? Okay, cool. You know.
Yeah. Completely.
All right, I'm going to golfing. You know, like they don't.
And at the end of the day, the thing is, they're wasting their money. I don't see any way in which they're able to successfully challenge it and not ultimately and lead to subpoenas that would ultimately end up with disclosure. Like, I don't see this as a winning move. And by the way, that representation, let's talk about the scope of that representation. I don't think it can go past the subpoena fighting, because I think after the subpoena, they each have to get their own attorneys, because as we talked about with Casey Tron and Denims, they are adverse to each other. They are really adverse to each other. I think the mods are probably more adverse to each other than Casey Tron and Denims, because they are being sued as a collective, and we don't know how to portion out the liability. So for the mods, see, for Casey Tron and Denims, they each have their own stream. So you can argue that their scope of liability is limited to what's on their own stream. And those are going to be two separate cases, because as much as we like to compare them and contrast them, they are separate people, and the details may matter to a judge. A judge theoretically could look at Casey Tron's case and say, well, you did a bad thing, but Denims, I like you, girl. I subbed to your OnlyFans. You know, you're good. I'm gonna let you off. Right? It's theoretically possible that happens. With the mods, if they look at the thread as a whole and they say, yeah, the thread is culpable, then they've got to portion that out. And I think that's where there's just you cannot avoid that.
And remember, it's not only just the thread, but what their actions. I mean, basically the way contributory copyright infringement works too, in a way, that's being alleged as a conspiracy almost. So it's not only just what they did right there, but who were they talking to? How did they facilitate it? You know, once again, who were they talking to? Frogan? Were they talking to Denims? Were they, and that Roman P guy or whoever they are? I mentioned this. The way they keep talking on their, the way they were talking on Reddit, they make it sound like they have access to people in charge. It's like, well, who are you? You're very important.
And that's going to be very interesting because I think this could end up really weakening Reddit by the people that think they have access and kind of exposing the fact that Reddit has been run by a very small group of people that have access to the people at the top and have been the only people talking to them and have been controlling the tone of Reddit, the overall direction of Reddit, the climate of Reddit, which we all know, right? Just like Twitch, right? There's certain people that exert extraordinary influence on Twitch, right? Same goes for Reddit. Same goes for a lot of other platforms, right? So, yeah.
And somebody in chat was asking, is this for all the cases? Well, yes, the same information will apply to all the cases. So they don't need to get a subpoena for each case. They've got one that evidence will be admissible in all of them. So,
yeah, so they're going to be able to get that. And once again, I don't see any situation in which, especially the internal Reddit messages, I can see how, look, there's going to be some, there may be some confidential or protected or privileged messages on their phones or other things that are not directly attached to Reddit or Discord, but within those platforms, certainly those messages are going to get turned over, right? The internal Discord and Reddit messages are 100% getting turned over.
Yeah, I mean, unless they're talking to like their lawyer, it's going to be right. It's not going to be. It's not going to be privileged. They're not going to have any, especially if it's a group chat or a group message. I don't know if you can do that on Reddit. Then there really is no confidentiality because they're all talking amongst themselves.
Well, 9%. 9%. Oh. 9% energy recharge, float attack. No crit rate. Attack per 7, devil crit. Okay. Okay. So a video called Railguns, the useless $1 billion weapon by Mega Projects. How interesting.
The railgun was supposed to be a revolution. It was a gun that didn't need gunpowder, firing a slug at 7 times the speed of sound and reaching ranges of up to 200 miles. Sleek, sexy, and seemingly pulled straight from a science fiction novel, it was a weapon the US Navy just desperately wanted. For years, the railgun was the crown jewel on the Pentagon's wish list, promising pinpoint strikes powered solely by the raw energy of physics and electricity. But by 2021, that dream had effectively died. There were no deployments, no plans for mass production, only a $500 million money pit and a pile of broken test rails. So what happened? How did the Navy manage to fumble what appeared to be a game-changing weapon? And why are China, Japan, and other nations still chasing a dream that Washington's already set aside? Well, this is the story of how the railgun went from a battlefield miracle to a $500 million mirage. A shocking idea. The quest to hurl projectiles using electricity instead of explosives began, surprisingly, actually well over a century ago. Specifically, during World War I, French inventor André-Louis Octet Fanchon Villeplay built a prototype electric cannon. This was, essentially, the first railgun, and he did it in 1918. The theory was simple. Use electromagnetic forces to accelerate a metal, specifically a magnetic metal, projectile to extreme speeds. In practice, however, it was like trying to bottle light. Early designs remained experimental. Even German scientists experimented with an electric anti-aircraft gun during World War II that never progressed beyond the drawing board. And for decades, that was the extent of the railgun's development. A bit of tinkering here, a bit of fettling there, enough to reconfirm time and time again that electromagnets could indeed make metal slugs go fast, and, well, that was about it. Nothing even remotely approaching a fully realized, ready-to-go weapon system for the real world. And so it was that railguns lived only in research papers and science fiction, a tantalizing what-if that promised to revolutionize firepower if only the engineering could catch up. Little did those early pioneers know that their ideas would spark one of the Pentagon's most expensive wild goose chases a century later. The Pentagon's big bet. Alright, fast forward to the 21st century, and in 2005, the United States Navy, ever in search of the newest war-winning toy, decided enough was enough and placed a daring bet on electromagnetic railguns. They were dreaming big. The Office of Naval Research promised a weapon straight out of sci-fi, a gun that would use no gunpowder, yet could fire projectiles at Mach 7 to hit targets more than 100 nautical miles away and do it accurately. It wouldn't even need any fancy kind of warhead. Sheer kinetic energy alone would be more than enough here, thanks to the absurd speed. Again, Mach 7 times the speed of sound. To be fair to them, the appeal was really obvious. Name a single conventional cannon that could manage that sort of range, never mind reliably, and you can't because they don't exist. Take the mighty Paris gun. That's Imperial Germany's 282-ton monster designed to lob shells at its titular city from afar. Even it could only manage 81 miles, and that was on a good day. And then there's the M1299 howitzer, BAE Systems' failed attempt at creating an ultra-long-range, yet accurate howitzer for the 21st century, which could reach 68 miles at best. And finally, consider the M65 atomic cannon, for which range was obviously really rather important. It delivered just 20 miles. You get the idea then. An accurate 100-mile-plus range out of a cannon, that's a pretty big deal. And for a time, everything appeared rosy for the Navy's new toy, and by 2008, enthusiasm was sky high. The Navy's Chief of Naval Operations had witnessed a record-setting test of a prototype built by BAE Systems at Dahlgren, Virginia, in January of that year, and they liked what they saw so much, in addition to 2 other successful tests in October 2006 and January 2007, that they revised their range estimates even further, now promising 200 miles at Mach 7. Alright, let's consider the railgun's provisional figures in a specifically naval context rather than just as a, other big cannons can't shoot big things so far. The Navy was eyeing it up to supplement and perhaps even replace the 5-inch Mark 45 gun, which has been their go-to ship gun since 1971 and can only push out to 20 miles on a good day. Naturally, with promises like that and progress toward achieving them coming along so nicely, the railgun became something of a military tech celebrity. This claim is best evidenced not only by the vast litany of articles that once discussed it in exciting terms, but also by its appearance in 2009's Transformers 2, in which one is shown giving one of the film's baddies the business from atop a US naval ship. Such enthusiasm demonstrates that at the time, the railgun was widely seen as near-future technology that was just around the corner. By 2010, the Navy had poured tens of millions into prototypes developed by both BAE Systems, as we've already mentioned, and General Atomics. In that same year, the latter began catching up with, and even surpassing the former. General Atomics' Blitzer test system set a new world record by firing a projectile at Mach 5, generating 33 megajoules of muzzle energy in the process. This output delivered roughly the same kinetic punch as a small hatchback car traveling at 100 miles per hour. From there, the Navy began talking openly and even boasting about deploying railguns on warships. The Zumwalt-class destroyers were touted as the first vessels to receive them. At the time, these ships were considered shiny, new, and futuristic, even if in reality they were simply big old piles of still in the process of coming into their own. As for dates, well, officials claimed they wanted to begin testing prototypes at sea by 2016, with a full rollout, as long as testing went well, following as soon as possible. But that rollout date never arrived, did it? How did this happen? How did a technology that appeared to be so full of potential just fail? And that's a good question indeed, one that we're going to answer after we've taken the time to get to grips with how railguns actually work. How to shoot a bullet with lightning. In simple terms, a railgun is essentially a giant electric circuit shaped like a gun barrel. It consists of two parallel conductive rails with a sliding armature or a conductive projectile positioned between them. When an enormous electric current, millions of amps worth, flows from one rail through the armature and into the other, it generates a powerful electromagnetic force known as the Lorentz force. This force launches the projectile down the rails at extreme speeds. In essence, the railgun converts electricity into kinetic energy. Now, to grasp the scale of the speeds involved here, consider that the Navy's goal of Mach 7 translates to about 5,369 miles per hour at sea level. That velocity is nearly 3 times faster than a high-powered rifle bullet and about 5 times greater than the muzzle velocity of the Iowa-class battleship's 16-inch guns from World War II. A projectile moving at such high speeds carries an immense amount of kinetic energy. Even a 10-kilogram slug can hit with the force of a Tomahawk cruise missile. Unlike a missile, however, the slug lacks explosives. It relies solely on its kinetic energy to destroy the target. This means that because the ammunition is essentially just the warhead, without any casing or powder charge behind it, a ship could potentially carry many more rounds. The space usually needed for these additional components is instead used to carry extra rounds. There are further advantages to the electromagnetic technology. For instance, the US Navy has pointed out that removing gunpowder and explosives makes warships far safer from accidental fires or enemy strikes. Meanwhile, you remember the HMS Hood that went up in a fire in World War II? Well, that kind of disaster would be nearly impossible with a powder-free ship. Additionally, eliminating powder results in less noise from the ship's guns, aside from the sonic boom produced when the projectile breaks the sound barrier. In theory, then, a railgun-armed ship could sit offshore and bombard inland targets with precision-guided hypervelocity projectiles, or even intercept incoming aircraft and missiles at a fraction of the cost of traditional interceptors. On paper, these physics look glorious, but theory and reality, they can often be two really different things, as railguns have proven. So let's see what the problem was. Hype meets hard reality. To begin, you remember when we mentioned that railguns to be effective needed millions of amps? Well, it turns out that is actually quite a lot of amps. Consider the light bulb that you're likely sitting under right now. If it's an old school incandescent type, which it's probably not, odds are that it draws a single amp at most. For those of you watching on your phone, the charger you pulled out this morning probably draws around 1 to 5 amps, and if you're watching this on a really powerful PC, it's likely drawing between 5 and 10 amps as we speak. So, 1,000,000 amps? Well, it's quite a big amount, isn't it? Then there's the matter of actually storing and delivering that massive pulse of electricity to the railgun. Remember we said that the Blitzer set a record breaking 33 megajoules of energy delivered? Well, achieving that required bulky banks of capacitors or advanced alternators, all of which occupied a huge amount of space and weight. Only a few ships in the US fleet, such as the Zumwalt, could even generate enough juice to entertain the idea of running the system. The Navy's most common combatants, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, would require a complete redesign to support a railgun, unless the Navy could somehow figure out a several thousand-mile-long extension cord. Those issues might have been solvable, however. After all, this is the US military we're talking about. If anyone could convert a load of ships into floating power banks to support a cutting-edge new system, well, it would be the US military, wouldn't it? When the energy issue is compounded by even more challenges, though, justifying such an effort just becomes all the more difficult. For example, barrel life proved to be quite an issue. You see, firing a projectile at Mach loads causes extreme friction along the rails, resulting in intense heat, metal vaporization, and gargantuan pressure. As a result, the rails, typically metals like copper, erode a little, or not so little, each time you pull the trigger. This led to test rails cracking or deforming after just a few dozen shots. The material science simply hadn't caught up to the power of the weapon. Engineers tried stronger alloys and clever designs, but a field-ready railgun barrel that can fire hundreds of rounds without melting down just proved elusive. What about the rate of fire? While the Navy initially wanted a railgun that could fire 6 to 10 rounds per minute to deal with swarming threats, that goal ran into the cold reality of capacity, recharge times, and anticipation. In practice, testers found it might take at least a minute to recharge for the next shot without frying something. The slow rate of fire also undermined one of the railgun's touted roles, air and missile defense. To shoot down a maneuvering missile, you might need multiple shots in quick succession. After all, these targets are notoriously tricky to hit, and a round a minute ain't gonna cut it. Then came concerns regarding guidance and accuracy. A 5-inch dart flying at hypersonic speeds, that's impressive, but only if it hits its target. The Navy did work on a so-called hypervelocity projectile that could be fired from the railgun, and it featured onboard guidance electronics. However, cramming guidance chips and fins into a projectile that must withstand 40 to 60,000 Gs of acceleration and searing plasma presents a material engineer's nightmare. By the late 2010s, when these issues were finally being fully appreciated, the Navy had already spent over $500 million on railgun R&D. Making it ship-ready would require hundreds of millions more for integration and prototypes, with no guarantee that they'd ever actually work. The world tries to catch up. It's also worth noting that while the US Navy very much led the charge, it was far from the only force wrestling with the railgun concept. China, in particular, took note and decided it wanted in on the action too. By 2018, photos emerged of a Chinese warship, the Haiyang Shan, a retrofitted tank landing ship sporting a massive turret on its bow that looks suspiciously like a railgun. The vessel had been converted into a floating test bed, complete with shipping containers full of what appears to be critical power equipment, and ultimately, it was sent to sea for trials. As early as 2019, US intelligence reports claimed that the Haiyang Shan was effectively getting shots off and at full power, and it might even be capable of hitting targets over 124 miles away at speeds of Mach 7 plus. A breathless CNBC report in 2018 even went so far as to predict that China's railgun would be operational by 2025. Not so far, beating the US to the punch. And given that, if you're watching this piece early, it's in mid-2025, are CNBC gonna be vindicated? Well, we'd better kidney on the fact that while they won't be operational in 2025, they might come at some point in the future. For all its technological flaws and hurdles, China really doesn't seem ready to write railguns off just yet. Back in February 2022, for example, the South China Morning Post quoted researcher Wang Shihou of the China Huiyang Ordnance Test Center, and he revealed plans to, quote, step up testing of railguns to an unprecedented level, with Chinese scientists working to solve wear and erosion issues by refining rail coatings and pulse characteristics. And then came a jaw-dropper. In late 2023, a team at the PLA Naval University of Engineering reported achieving 120 consecutive shots at Mach 6 without serious barrel damage, an endurance milestone that the US never even came close to matching. If true, that's a significant breakthrough. And actually, they didn't attribute the success as being entirely due to ever more exotic and fancy materials used in their railguns' construction, but rather to the software that it's hooked up to. China claims to use a sophisticated AI-powered measurement and diagnostic system that collects data from more than 100,000 sensors simultaneously, over 10 times the number found on a modern aircraft, and then uses that data to figure out exactly how far the railgun can be pushed on the next shot before it gets all blowy-uppy. Of course, Beijing has been characteristically secretive, so confirmed beyond all doubt details are few and far between. However, we do know that their program is led by Rear Admiral Ma Weining, a sort of rock star engineer who drove China's development of electromagnetic catapults for aircraft carriers, so it's not like they're lacking in suitably wrinkly brains. Beyond China, however, India's also been pursuing railgun technology. In 2017, for example, India's Defense Research and Development Organization, or DRDO, successfully test-fired a modest 12mm electromagnetic railgun, accelerating a tiny projectile to about Mach 6. Buoyed by that experiment, India announced plans for a larger 30mm prototype and ultimately a 1kg projectile traveling at around Mach 6. In 2025, DRDO even inaugurated a dedicated center for electromagnetic launch technology to develop futuristic railgun systems. Indian defense officials tout that such guns could give the Indian Army and Navy a strategic edge, blasting targets in high-altitude border regions or equipping warships with ultra-fast shots against aerial threats. Meanwhile, Japan has also become a leader in electromagnetic guns, a development not entirely surprising given the nation's high-tech pedigree. Their efforts began in 2016 when the Japanese Acquisition Technology and Logistics Agency, snappy name, launched a railgun development program aimed at achieving a muzzle velocity of just over 6,500 feet per second and a barrel life of 120 shots. Impressively, Japan met these goals. By experimenting with different rail materials, switching from copper to other alloys, their engineers achieved 120 continuous firings without significant rail damage. Then, in October of 2023, Japan conducted its first shipboard test of a railgun firing from a test ship. The event marked the world's first at-sea railgun firing since the Chinese tests. And Japan's motivation is particularly pointed as well. They're developing railguns as potential defense against the new threat of hypersonic missiles, a threat further underlined by the fact that their neighbor China, with whom they aren't exactly on friendly terms, has been really stockpiling these missiles of late. The European scene's also noteworthy. The European Defence Agency ran Project Pylon, projectiles for increased long-range effects using electromagnetic railgun, another mouthful, from 2020 to 2023. The project brought together scientists and industry representatives from France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, and Poland to study a naval/land railgun with a 200-kilometer range. By 2023, they reported that results exceed expectations in key areas, from durable barrel coatings that mitigate wear to a conceptual hypervelocity projectile that can survive Mach 6 acceleration. Following Pylon's wrap-up, a follow-on project named THEMA, Technology for Electromagnetic Artillery, now aims to test a full-scale demonstrator by 2028 and possibly develop a roadmap for a deployable system by 2035. In plain English, they're not rushing a railgun to the battlefield next year. Instead, they're quietly working on solving individual pieces of the puzzle and no doubt observing the Americans' expensive lessons with a knowing smile. Global interest in railguns also shows that the concept's not dead. Yet, it has become something of an engineering holy grail, with nations drawn to it despite the US's experience, each believing that they might be the ones who can crack it. As for whether any of these new contenders will succeed where the US has failed, I mean, frankly, who knows? We're not prophets, nor do we have triple PhDs in electrical engineering. But what we do know is that a split in the path is coming. Down one path lies sweet vindication for the US, as all these other countries will end up spending God knows how much money only to discover that old Uncle Sam was right all along and that they should have followed his example. Down the other path, however, we see an Uncle Sam who's a bit foolish because, for once, he actually bothered to cancel a program whose costs were spiraling into the heavens, only for it to turn out that the project could very well have been completed with just a bit more time, a bit more cash, and a bit more belief. And speaking of Uncle Sam, we never actually told you how he came to throw in the towel, did we? So, let's get to that. The end of the line. For the US Navy, the railgun dream officially met its end in July 2021. In a curt, bureaucratically worded announcement tinged with a hint of disappointment, the Navy revealed that it was pausing railgun R&D at the end of 2021 due to fiscal constraints, combat system integration challenges, and the prospective technology maturation of other weapon concepts, end quote. In straightforward terms, the Navy was out of money and patience, and missiles and lasers had simply become too advanced. The final blow came with the quiet termination of the hypervelocity projectile program in the 2022 budget. With that, the American railgun was officially dead. Now, at this point, it's important to focus specifically on the maturation of other weapon concepts remark. We already know enough about the railgun's issues, and there's no need to rehash old challenges. Basically, while engineers were busy tinkering with railguns, guided missiles were improving at a rapid pace, becoming better, smarter, and in some cases cheaper. The Navy had concluded that a $2 million hypersonic missile capable of delivering a precise blow from 1,000 miles away might now be a more attractive investment than a $500 million and counting gun that at best might only reach 100 to 200 miles. And then there's the matter of shipborne lasers. No longer confined to the realm of science fiction, these systems have advanced well beyond experimental lab models and one-off prototypes. Operational systems are now quietly entering service at sea. Leading the charge is the US Navy's Helios system, short for High Energy Laser with Integrated Optical Dazzler and Surveillance, which was installed aboard the USS Preble in 2019. Mounted where a traditional close-in weapon system would typically be located, Helios is a 60-kilowatt solid-state fiber laser integrated directly into the Aegis combat system. Unlike past bolt-on tests, this is a full combat-ready suite that not only burns drones out of the sky, but also blinds hostile sensors and provides real-time target tracking. It has already demonstrated its ability to shoot down UAVs in real-world tests, and its only real limitation is the electrical power available from the ship, as theoretically it can fire as long as the lights stay on. And it's not just the Americans taking the lead. In January 2024, the UK announced successful test firings of its Dragonfire system from a static site in Scotland, hitting aerial targets with remarkable precision. Developed through a £115 million joint effort by MBDA Missile Systems, Leonardo, and the UK Ministry of Defence, Dragonfire is expected to be installed aboard Royal Navy warships as soon as 2027. Installation contracts have already been signed for initial 4 vessels. British officials have been blunt in their goals. This isn't about lab curiosity, it's about burning drones and missiles out of the sky for pennies per shot. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, China has quietly joined the naval laser race. In 2024, satellite and social media images revealed a People's Liberation Army Navy Type 071 amphibious transport dock like Siming Shan or
We are doing nothing of the sort. When it comes to our lasers, at least. Spinning resources and frivolous things like
All things come to an end, even time itself.
worrying around. Anyway, that's going to be it for this stream. Good luck, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.